Knockoff is a serious issue in competitive Pokemon. What started out as a rarely used utility move turned into one of the most commonly spammed moves, almost mandatory to run on teams. But it wasn't always like this. So what makes Knockoff such a huge problem, warranting a whole video about it? Well, first we have to take it back to where it all started. We travel back to Generation 2 when the Dark type was introduced. Dark type attacks weren't at their best spot then, but there are a few juicers in there that hold up today. The main flaw was Dark being a purely special attacking type, while almost all offensive Dark types are built to be physical attackers. So there wasn't much of a reason to use moves other than the Trapping Pursuit on your Dark type attacker, when Shadow Ball could hit the same type super effectively but on the physical side. Generation 3 rolled around, and the Dark type got some new toys. The Great Taunt quickly became a fantastic option for leads and support Pokemon, but we were also introduced to a very primitive version of the move Knockoff. A 20 base power, special Dark type attack that doesn't even actually remove the target's item. Yeah, this move was sort of a fraud in its first two generations. Instead of getting rid of the item, it would just make it unusable for the rest of the battle. What's the difference? Well, it still prohibits the use of the held item, but the knocked off Pokemon cannot be affected by item manipulation. Trick and Switcheroo will fail if a knocked off Pokemon is involved, along with Thief and Covet, not allowing an item to be stolen or given away. This does serve some advantages, as you could technically swap in a support Pokemon on a knockoff and be immune to being tricked to harmful item. Overall, Knockoff wasn't really on the radar competitively in Generation 3 due to its low power and limited distribution, only being a level up move on a handful of lines. It could be decent on a couple support Pokemon, but the whole idea of it was more of a utility move. Keep in mind this is considering time before the buffs we will see later on that influence current play of older generations competitive. I will get to that later. Generation 4 saw some changes for Knockoff. It saw its distribution widen considerably, with more mons learning it upon level up, along with a Platinum move tutor expanding its roster of potential users tenfold. The physical special split also took place here. Knockoff was now a physical attack. This meant a lot of the physical attacking Dark types with access can use their higher attacking stat with this move. But why would they use their stab on a 20 base power move when they can use one of the other way more powerful options available? This generation introduced moves like Sucker Punch, Night Slash, Payback, and Punishment, physical Dark type moves that provide a lot more firepower than Knockoff, along with having their own nice utility and effects. Throw in Pursuit and Crunch being physical, and you have a lot of Pokemon running different Dark type attacks based on which fits their set most effectively. Knockoff definitely wasn't seen as a great move. I wasn't playing competitive then, but I imagine mostly due to the opportunity cost of barely doing any damage in turn for its utility. Frailer mons just couldn't afford to run it and take an extra hit. They would rather run a more powerful attack going for KOs and try to avoid taking hits altogether. This limited potential users to support Pokemon who could free up a move slot for item removal. The damage was still just a minor addition, as even a super effective hit wouldn't do much. The main effect was getting rid of items and making slow progress against your opponent. Something that was less difficult back then with permanent weather, larger burn chip, lack of hazard removal options, and lack of heavy duty boots, all contributing to more residual damage. Generation 5 changed Knockoff by having it actually remove the held item. A minor change on paper, but different enough in practice to matter. You're now vulnerable to item manipulation if knocked off, and can be given an item through means like Trick and Bestow. But this move is still only 20 base power, and mind you, this entire time, it also gains no damage boost for hitting a target with a held item. It is a similar story here. A few support Pokemon can fit it into their sets if they want to go for another support option. Maybe they have it covered on another party member and can fit the utility on their set. Sometimes it could be the only way mons like Ferrothorn could make progress against opposing Ferrothorn by getting rid of their lefty's recovery. Still not a crazy good move. We get to Generation 6, and there was a huge change competitively for many reasons, but the focus of this video is the problem with Knockoff, and it really started here. Knockoff saw perhaps the largest buff of any move in Pokemon history. Its base power shot up from 20 to 65, making it hit reasonably hard for a move with an amazing secondary effect. In addition, Knockoff now also gains a 1.5 times boost when hitting a target with a removable item. This brings it up to a crazy strong 97.5 base power in these situations, and you're usually going to click this move when the opponent has an item. This is stronger than moves such as Night Slash, Crunch, and Sucker Punch. It can only be overpowered by a few moves that take certain scenarios to become stronger. Seemingly overnight, pretty much every offensive Pokemon that has access to Knockoff added it onto their set. Defensive Pokemon were even more inclined to run it now, as it provided a strong coverage option with no immunities. The pool of Knockoff learners kept growing as tutors continued over the generations and could be brought forward or relearned. Special attacking Pokemon would even run the physical Knockoff on their sets due to the sheer utility removing an item brings. Getting rid of the opponent's Choice Scarf, Life Orb, Leftovers, Berries, it was all great and so easy because you are also gaining a nearly 100 base power hit to go with it. With such a great move, of course you're going to use it, and of course you're going to see it used a lot. When you're playing competitive, you want to use the best moves available to give yourself the best chance at winning, so leaving it off your sets is almost like playing with a handicap. There is very little downside to running a few Knockoff users on your team. It synergized great with all the fighting types who learn it, since it covered the Psychic and Ghost types their fighting stat wouldn't be good against. Mega Pokemon, or ones with form-changing items, were pretty much the most reliable swap-ins if you didn't want to lose a valuable item, since they were luckily protected from Knockoff's item removal effect and the damage boost. Later in Gen 7, Z Crystals share this effect, which helps since you could potentially have 2 to 3 Knockoff absorbers on a team. Even Pokemon with Sticky Hold weren't fully protected from Knockoff's wrath, as even though their item couldn't be removed, the bonus damage would still apply. This has been a personal gripe, and a buff to this ability to take less Knockoff damage is definitely due. Having to play these games around Knockoff starts to become an issue, as items are so important to how a lot of Pokemon function. You take away Leftovers from a defensive mon without reliable recovery, and they're now on a timer. Remove a damage boosting item, Berry, Assault Vest, you name it, they're severely crippled. It's almost like a status condition, except you don't have types that are immune to it, rather just specific Pokemon that don't mind losing their item quite as much. And if you think this is just nice to prevent stall, that's not necessarily true. Defensive mons with healing could afford to take hits and remove damage boosting items and Leftovers, which gave them a much easier time wearing down opposing teams while heal spamming and racking up unhealable residual damage, while also not being scared of Life Orb or choice boosted attacks. Over the next 3 generations, we had a few good dark type attacks added, but besides some amazing signature move, there is very little reason to use them over the utility and power Knockoff provides. Its continuation of being a move tutor since Generation 4 made sure that it always had enormous distribution at some point in the generation. And it seems like they just slap this onto anything they want, even if it doesn't make much sense design-wise. But Arceus forbid we give it to a mon like Tyranitar until Generation 9 when it finally falls to UU. So now that we covered the evolution of Knockoff, I want to dive deeper into the real problems with it from a game design point of view. The first issue is invalidation of other moves. It's really strong for a move with such amazing utility. With Knockoff's power buff in Generation 6, it now hits harder than any other physical non-signature dark type attack when the user is holding an item that can be removed. More often than not, you will have this power boost when you're using Knockoff. With the power and utility, there's no reason to run otherwise good attacks like Throat Chop, Night Slash, Lash Out, and oftentimes Crunch, which was sort of the physical standard. Sometimes you might see these two side by side on the same set, but Knockoff is the first choice here. Other dark moves with specific niches are still seen, like Sucker Punch due to the priority and Pursuit for trapping, but even the latter has been removed for 2 generations, making knockoff a further centralizing move that invalidates other options. Pretty much the only reason you won't see a physical dark type mod running this move would be because it doesn't have access and is forced to run an inferior option. This also invalidates weak niche item manipulation moves. Thief, Covet, and the newer Corrosive Gas don't really see play when knockoff is so easy to slap on and stronger, while also not requiring you to abstain from holding an item yourself to have them work. It's actually just a disadvantage to not run knockoff, not only on dark type Pokemon, but on other mods with access. The amount of situations having knockoff over a similarly powerful move like Crunch will help you is huge. I would say 9 times out of 10, you will get heaps more value from running it. Setup Pokemon gain the extra damage when trying to sweep. That could be the difference between a KO and a 2-shot. This makes the 65 base power a knockoff when the target doesn't have an item less detrimental. Removing an item also aids in almost every situation. Remove a choice item, you're now potentially faster against a Scarf mod and bulkier against a Banded or Specs mod. Remove leftovers, you're netting about 6 to 7% more damage per turn against that mon for the rest of the battle. Remove heavy duty boots, now they're vulnerable to entry hazard chip. The list can go on, all on top of gaining more damage than the rest of the options. Any situation that a move like Crunch would be better for is due to the slightly better consistent damage over time and small chance at a defense drop. Both things that can be checked by swapping in an appropriate mon while still retaining your valuable item. This really turns the physical dark type move pool into the knockoff show, where if you have it, you're gonna run it and not give second thoughts about any other move except maybe Sucker Punch. The second big issue, which I covered briefly, is the distribution. I probably wouldn't be making this video if they didn't give this move to everyone and their grandma to use. I understand dark types and other Pokemon that have large hands being thematically fitting, but really, Pokemon like Arbok, Victreebel, Dodrio, Pelipper, Seviper, Drifblim, Chimecho, Mamoswine, Serperior, Swoobat, Whimsicott, Swanna, Amoga, Cragnole, Toucanon, Toxapex, Comfey, Dhelmise, Nolego, Phalanx, amongst so many others, all gaining access when they definitely don't fit well thematically is crazy. It's one of the best and most powerful moves having some of the widest distribution. If it was a more limited move, only on certain dark types that fit stylistically, plus a few other fitting mons, then it would be more manageable. But as it stands now, you can easily find 2 to 3 viable knockoff users for your team in any format you're playing in. The third issue is the move slot compression. With knockoff, you compress the value of 2 moves into 1. Item removal and amazing damage shouldn't be allowed to exist in one move. Pre-buff knockoff was maybe a little weak, but it definitely didn't allow offensive and defensive Pokemon to essentially free up a move slot by running this. Even after the item is removed, you still have this as a solid damage option, which gives it value over the course of a match. The fourth and final issue I'm going to present is the lack of counterplay. Dark is one of the few types with no immunities through other typings or abilities. It can't be taunted, and with the last 2 generations not having a gimmick that requires holding an item, you are way less likely to be carrying an item that cannot be knocked off. Even resists like Fighting, Fairy, and Dark itself can't afford to swap in unless they want to go without their held item for the rest of the match. This makes it arguably more powerful now than ever, especially as more great items like heavy duty boots are introduced and relied on. You won't risk swapping in mons that depend on their held item, which limits your playstyle while freeing up your opponent's options. You may have a Pokemon holding a status orb or a broken focus sash that you don't mind losing, but you're still taking the boosted damage. It creates a lot of 50-50s, usually in the knockoff user's favor, and forces more sacks to safely get in your mon who needs their item to revenge KO or outspeed. The dominance of knockoff from Gen 6 on even started to make it prevalent in older generations. Even without the boosted damage, knockoff is now seen as a great utility move on mons like Clefable and Ferrothorn, the same way they would use it in later gens. Usage has risen compared to its initial showing, as the power of getting rid of items was really made apparent. I can't claim to be a huge competitive scholar on these older metas as I wasn't playing competitively during those times. But knockoff seems to have a spot currently in older metas. While not as over-centralizing, it shows that newer trends can influence older ones. Now is my favorite part, where I get to be a little bit creative. How to balance this move in a way that gives other dark type moves a chance while not totally destroying it in the process. The most realistic option I would settle for is a simple distribution nerf, not allowing hundreds of mons to access it. Just the certain dark types along with a few other fitting users would be great. Make it a rare and valuable tool you might need to squeeze an otherwise non-optimal mon on your team to use. It could buff some lower tier mons this way and force other Pokemon to use the great alternative options Dark has for coverage. If limiting distribution isn't enough, I would say a power nerf would do the trick. No Scizor, we're not nerfing it to 60 base power, you sick twisted bug. I would put knockoff at a still decent 50 base power, which would hit at 75 base power only when removing an item. This would be a decent buff for Technician mons when hitting a Pokemon without a held item, but it wouldn't get Technician boosted when removing an item, leaving them with a consistent 75 base power attack. The rest of the users would still have an alright damage option that would be riskier to run as your main stab or dark coverage option on offensive mons. It would be much easier to swap into and can't be spammed as an OHKO machine on dark weak mons. You would now have to choose between the utility of item removal or greater damage of other attacks. Of course, more defensive Pokemon would perform similarly, just spread a little bit less damage. I think you could even go as low as 40 base power and boosted to 60 when removing an item, and the same logic would apply. We will also buff the ability Sticky Hold to not take the extra damage when being hit by knockoff. This doesn't make sense in the first place, and I'm surprised it hasn't been addressed already. It would give this ability a lot more potential, even though it's usually just overshadowed by other abilities on its few users. Having a knockoff absorber that isn't a Mega, Z Crystal holder, or holding a form-changing item would be a great addition. To conclude, knockoff definitely isn't overbearing to the extent of a ban, but it is definitely a problem in my opinion. It invalidates so many other moves while being such an easy slap on to so many mons. I think it could use a bit of a nerf one way or another. I hope you enjoyed this type of analysis / rant. I have a bunch of other ideas for this type of series, so if we can get this video to 1,000 likes, I'll keep these coming regularly. Shout out to my YouTube and Patreon members, including Goldbuds, Mr. Frank Beans, Bucket Boys, Wario, and Divi. If you want to become a member and support the channel while getting perks, you can for less than $1 American. If you like this video, make sure you check this one out next. I chose it specifically for you. I'll see you there, buds.